After 7 weeks of the season, we are starting to get some robust data on college football teams. In this episode, I'll make the case for looking at teams based on success rate, and I'll tell you how this has evolved since I first got into football analytics. Then, we'll dig into 3 teams based on these numbers. This has huge implications for a big Week 8 game in the Big Ten, and it will also tell the future in a conference that won't exist next year. When I first got into football analytics, it was all about yards per play. Back then, I was still in academia, and I met with Stuart Mandel, who was then at Sports Illustrated, and he was interested in yards per play adjusted for opponent. Yards per play is an important efficiency metric because it adjusts for the pace of play. It's not just total yards in a game where you can get more because you're playing up-tempo offense. Adjusting for strength of schedule was my strength because of my math background. A lot has changed over the past dozen years. Maybe yards per play isn't the best efficiency metric. Part of the reason is explosive plays. As a simple example, let's look at 2 offenses. The first offense gets 0 yards on the first 3 plays, but then breaks off an 80-yard touchdown play. The second offense gets 5 yards on each of the 4 plays. The first offense looks the best as they have racked up 20 yards per play. However, you might actually prefer the consistency of the second offense. Even though they only averaged 5 yards per play, they consistently moved the ball on each play. We're going to look at which of these 2 types of offenses is more predictive of the future. And to do this, we're going to contrast yards per play by a different measure called success rate. This is something that's going to quantify how an offense performs on a play-by-play basis. I'm going to use the following definition for success on a play for an offense. It's all based on the number of yards to go to get the next first down. For an offense, a play is a success if they get 50% of those necessary yards on first down, 70% of those necessary yards on second down, and obviously 100% of those necessary yards on third and fourth down. Bill Connolly of ESPN did some of the first work looking at success rate and how predictive it is. To do this, he took a college football season and looked at an earlier time period and a later time period and asked about the correlation of success rate between these 2 different time periods. He found a very high correlation in this quantity, and that means success rate tends to be predictive. Bill also asked another question. He asked how predictive are explosive plays, such as the 80-yard touchdown that we talked about for that first offense. To do this, he looked only at successful plays, and he essentially calculated what is a yards per play on those successful plays. Again, he did the same study as with success rate, broke up the season into 2 different time periods, and asked about the correlation. This time, with explosiveness, he found no statistical relationship. What this means is that there is a huge random element in explosive plays. In yards per play, there is a component based on consistent success in every play, and this is predictive. Yards per play also has a component based on explosive plays. This part of yards per play has a huge random element. When we talked about the 2 offenses from earlier, this is actually why we want to have the second offense. That second offense got 5 yards on each play and consistently moved the ball on each play. This type of behavior tends to persist in the future. The first offense relied on 1 explosive play, and this is more random. Clearly, these 2 offenses are extremes, and every real offense that we talk about in football is going to be some mixture of them. But we clearly want the one that is successful at moving the football on a play-by-play basis. This does not mean that we throw our yards per play. It is still a useful metric. But it does mean that we lean on success rate, and I do believe this quantity gets to the truth faster, which is very important in the small sample size of football. I actually don't have an exact number about how much more predictive success rate is compared to yards per play in college football. I have done a study in the NFL for passing plays, and I found that passing success rate in the NFL is more predictive than yards per pass attempt. I tend to lean on passing success rate first before yards per play. As a simple example, the Detroit Lions are second in my adjusted yards per pass attempt right now in the NFL. They are fourth in my adjusted success rate. I lean towards the latter. I think the Detroit Lions are a top 5 pass offense in the NFL. I'm not sure if they're one of the best two. Now, let's dig into 3 interesting college football teams based on this analysis. Penn State is a college football team that came into the season with a high ceiling. They had a lot of talent. As an example, they had sophomore running backs Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. Can they step up to be a college football playoff contender? They can make their case this week. They are 6-0 and they travel to Columbus for a huge game against Ohio State, also an undefeated team. Let's look at how the Penn State offense has done. And we actually start to see a discrepancy between success rate and yards per play. The Penn State offense ranks 15th in my adjusted success rate. That is really good. However, they rank 60th in my adjusted yards per play. This suggests a lack of explosive plays so far this season. Let's focus in on the rush offense, and let's look at some raw numbers. Penn State has been successful on 51.7% of rushing plays this season. This is the highest mark in the Big Ten. In addition, it's significantly better than the college football average success rate on rushing plays of 42.7. So there's a huge gap between 51.7 that Penn State has had this year and the college football average of 42.7. Now, let's look at yards per carry. Penn State has averaged 4.8 yards per carry this season. This is below average in the Big Ten. In fact, it is below the college football average of 5.1 yards per carry. Those 2 running backs we talked about earlier, they are not breaking off the big plays. Nicholas Singleton has 4.1 yards per carry this season compared to 6.8 last year. Katron Allen is averaging 4.8 yards per carry this year compared to 5.2 last year. We can look at PFF grades to get a sense for where the problem might be. Penn State ranks 48th in run blocking out of 133 teams. So it seems like the offensive line could be doing better. Before, I had talked about the raw rushing success rate numbers. When I make adjustments for strength of schedule, Penn State comes out 31st in adjusted success rate. That's good, but we probably expect a little bit better. Penn State is 98th when I look at adjusted yards per carry. That is clearly not good. They are not getting those chunk runs. Could this change at Ohio State? Maybe. It's hard to say with such a random element in explosive plays. However, coming into the season, we did think that Penn State had elite talent at the running back position. On defense, Penn State came into the season with some worries about size on the defensive line and whether that would hold up in defending the run. This has turned out to be true as they are better against the pass than the run. They rank first in my adjusted passing success rate in the nation, so they are elite in defending the pass. They are not as good against the run. They are 29th in rushing success rate adjusted for opponent. This is actually good when you're going up against Ohio State. This is an offense that has really struggled running the ball. They are 107th in my adjusted success rate. They are much better at throwing the ball. They are 10th in the nation. That's not surprising given that they probably have the best receiving core in the nation, led by Marvin Harrison Jr. Also, I think quarterback Kyle McCord is good. When you give him some time, he has enough accuracy to get the ball down the field to these elite receivers. There's really no wow factor in this game. He is not C.J. Stroud, but he's certainly good enough to lead this Ohio State offense. My numbers have these two teams rated about the same, and I make Ohio State about a 3-point favorite in this game at home. The USC Trojans were 6-0 heading into Notre Dame. However, you could tell that things might not go so well because they close as a 3-point underdog on the road. With USC, we know all about the offense with quarterback Caleb Williams, who is the defending Heisman Trophy winner. However, we did have questions about the defense, which was simply awful last year. At Notre Dame, everything went wrong for USC. Williams threw 3 interceptions in the first half. USC made it worse by fumbling, and Notre Dame returned this for a touchdown. USC was down 24-6 at the half. On FanDuel, the Heisman odds for Williams got as low as 50-1 in the second half. Overall for the game, USC was -5 in turnover differential, and they suffered a 48-20 loss. However, the scoreboard actually masks a pretty decent performance by the defense. Again, this was a unit that needed to get better coming into the season. They were 93rd when I looked at my adjusted success rate last year in 2022. The hope for this season was they brought back a lot of returning talent. 14 of 19 players that had 200 snaps from last season returned. But you could really ask whether this was a good thing. USC only brought in a handful of transfers to help this unit. But against Notre Dame, they allowed a 40.4% success rate. That's actually better than the college football average of 41.2%. And this is a really good performance because Notre Dame is a borderline top 25 offense by my numbers. The game masks a USC defense that is actually 34th in my adjusted success rate. That is remarkable, especially given the expectations. But that's not really how it seems. The USC defense gave up 41 points to both Colorado and Arizona in their previous 2 games before Notre Dame. And big plays were part of the issue. Both Colorado and Arizona had more than 6 yards per play. By my adjusted yards per play, USC is 55th. That is not as good as their rank by success rate. But again, I lean towards that rank of success rate. Remember, they were 34th for this defense. The USC defense has certainly improved from last season. Don't let the scoreboard at Notre Dame fool you. The offense should be able to bounce back from an awful performance against Notre Dame. And let's remember that USC has 0 losses in conference. They are still in a really good position in the Pac-12. I'm not sure that USC is going to win the Pac-12 because of the next team I'm going to talk about, but they are certainly in contention. Oregon came into the season with an explosive offense, but a lot of questions on defense. This is very similar to what we thought about USC, the team I talked about previously, and it's also very similar to the expectations that Washington had as well. As I mentioned in the last section, USC decided to rely on returning players and only added in a handful of transfers. Washington had the same strategy. Not Oregon coach Dan Lanning. He hit the transfer portal hard. He brought in a host of players to help the defense, and a lot of them are making significant contributions. Safety Tysheem Johnson from Mississippi has played more snaps than any other player on the defense. Cornerback Kyrie Jackson from Alabama has played more snaps than any other cornerback, and he has a 74 coverage grade from PFF. Defensive end Jordan Burch from South Carolina is tied for the team lead in sacks at 3. The results have been great. Oregon is 8th in my adjusted success rate. This is a massive improvement from the 65th that they were last season. Against Washington last week, the defense kind of struggled in the first half, but they were much better in the second half. This Ducks defense was a big reason that Oregon at Washington was such an amazing game. I feel like we got cheated out of more great football when Oregon missed a tying field goal at the end of regulation. For the game, the Oregon defense held Washington to a 48.4% success rate. That seems like a lot compared to a college football average of 41.2%, but Washington is the top offense in the nation by my numbers. They are actually expected to have a success rate of 55% against an average college football defense. This was a good performance for the Oregon defense, and it actually moved them into the top 10 for me. Dan Lanning spent 3 seasons as the defensive coordinator at Georgia. It seems like he knows what he is doing. Oregon's offense continues to be elite. They are 5th in my adjusted success rate. A lot of this comes down to quarterback Bo Nix. After 3 years of unmet expectations at Auburn, it is both surprising and nice to see him having success. He also has the services of a wide receiver, Tony Franklin, who is a star. He had 8 catches for 154 yards against Washington. Oregon is the most balanced team in the Pac-12. Obviously, it isn't good to have a loss on the ledger. However, the race is far from over. Oregon does get to travel to Utah. They will host USC later in the season. If they can win both those games, they have a really good shot to make the Pac-12 championship game as one of 2 teams with the best record. Certainly don't count them out despite the loss to Washington. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, and I'm proud to be your host. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be 3 things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every week, I send out 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. If you're looking for action on any given weekend, this is the free service for you. In it, I talk about some of the NFL interception props that have gone really well this season. I also curate the insights of other sharp bettors in the space. To sign up for this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. My name is Ed Fang. Thanks again so much for listening all the way to the end, and I will talk to you again soon.